types of learning models.
Too late. Get it.
It's okay. We're live now. We're good.
Okay, we're good?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we were.
That's okay. We'll reel her back in. But there you go, Denise. Okay. I don't know, the next session has to do with a big subject, but it's very practical in nature. Because I think it's important that as we think about what our role is in the church as disciple makers, and the kind of the end game of what we're trying to accomplish is certainly growth in the lives of our people that we are shepherding. That growth needs to be expressed in how they are conforming to the image of Christ in their own lives. But it's also about growth in the body of Christ as well. Some people like to discount numbers and say, well, numbers aren't important, it's about the people. Yeah, that's true. But every number represents person. And we are not, our first responsibility is not to fill a room, but our first responsibility is to fill an individual. And then what happens is, though, as those individuals are filled, guess what? They start working, and they start doing, and they start living, and they become authentic, effective disciples. And there just seems to be this undeniable result that happens from personal growth. It begins to multiply in their lives. And as that happens, it multiplies in our churches. And that's when we say, not every church that has a lot of people has a lot of people who are growing. Okay? It's just a fact.
Yeah.
There are various reasons why church buildings are filled from week to week. And it's not always because the people in that church are being discipled and are growing in their faith in Jesus Christ. There's a lot of different reasons. But when you do have people who are growing in their faith and are being discipled and are on kingdom advance themselves, you're going to find growth in numbers as well. You're going to find multiplication happening in the church. And it will look according to whatever community they're in. I mean, if you're a community of 5,000 people, you got X number of people in that community that you can reach, as opposed to a community of 500,000 people. You got a lot more folks out there and possibilities. But nevertheless, I think personal growth always translates to numerical growth in a church. Now, the same principle applies for your class as well. I think there are some things that you could incorporate into your own ministry that would help to at least stimulate and not hinder the growth of your own ministry, the people who are there. The only problem is with growth, particularly in Sunday school classes, is that without a proper perspective, there tends to be a territoriality that happens. Your turf. Your class becomes your turf. And you want to see it grow, and you do the things necessary to grow, but you don't want to see anybody leave, and you don't want anything to happen in your church that will draw people out of your group, like new classes and new units that are started. You say, okay, I'm great that you're starting that new class over here, but don't take any of my people. But God may want to use those people. He may be readying for new classes here in this church by the ministry that you're doing with your people right now. Because you are training them up. You are preparing them for taking over and leading other groups. So you've got to walk into this discussion about growth with a good mindset that this is about multiplication. It's also about releasing your turf and seeing the kingdom of God as bigger than your walls in your room. It's bigger, it's more expansive, and it's more important than your four walls. Yours that's where the seed's planted, and then you let it grow. and when we're thinking about this, I'm going back to this not to explain it anymore, only to show you where we are. That as we're doing the things in our groups, as we're making disciples in our small groups, in our Sunday school classes, that this is one way, and an important way, that our church grows. If you want a church to grow healthy, you start it in your small groups. You start it in your Sunday school classes. You don't start it by trying to fill your auditorium and then get people into your groups. You start it in your groups, because that's where real heart-to-heart, life-to-life stuff happens. And that's when people become invested in belonging, is in your Sunday school classes. And then that represents itself in the bigger time, in big church. There was in years past, there was a rule that that Sunday school classes actually, or the Sunday school ministry of the church, was actually bigger than the worship service, and that was okay. I'm talking about years ago, not 2 years ago, but maybe 40 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe more, where the entry point into your church was through your Sunday school classes. And then that translated into your worship service. Then you push them out into your worship service. So typically churches would have a bigger representation in their Sunday school classes, because that's where the work started. Now though, there tends to be and we were talking about lay renewal a minute ago, there's such an attention on the pulpiteer and the guy at the pulpit and the sermon and the preacher, that we depend on that to drive people into our church. The attractiveness of our worship service and what we're doing there, and the preaching and all that, we're trying to drive people in there, and our groups are secondary to that. And I think both represent really healthy ways to grow as a church, but I think that the small group idea is still valid. I think if we can get to a point to where we're really focusing and concentrating on expanding our small group Sunday school ministry, it's gonna expand our worship service.
Well, pardon me.
Yeah.
You've also got to get, once you have a believer, a new convert,
Yeah.
then you have to grow them
Mm-hmm.
to get them enough of the milk
Mm-hmm.
of the word
Yeah.
that they can digest
Mm-hmm.
it, internalize it,
Yeah.
and get them ready for the meat
Right.
of the word.
Yeah.
And I believe
Mhm.
a lot of that
Mm-hmm.
comes from your Sunday school
Yeah.
class.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And it also provides a platform for lay ministry. You were talking to me about that during the break. The recognition that God gifts all of us, and not just one person. And so when we talk about leadership in the church, we're not just talking about one man.
Right.
We're talking about the church, and how the leaders in the church, whether they be those who are set aside for a pastoral ministry, or those who are set aside for another type of ministry in the church, are working together. And we're not just depending on one or the other to do all the work for us. And particularly not one person, because one person is never going to have everything needed
Exactly.
to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And you probably come close to it, but
No.
but one person never has
No.
all that's needed.
No.
Your service and your participation and your leadership in your arena is absolutely vital, and that's why I want to talk about these growth principles with you, because if you know how to grow your class and you start thinking about ways that you can do that, then you can contribute to the overall growth of the church. in ways that, you know, are inexpressible. So I want to talk first about the idea about open groups. We call it, this is a lingo that we use now in the Sunday school world. You may not be familiar with it, but if you do go to Lifeway conferences and things like that, you'll hear the term open groups. When we talk about open groups, we're talking in the dashed line there gives you the indication about an environment in which anybody can come. Come on in. We're here for you. Any day, any time, any week. We're here. And we're welcoming you into this group. You know, there is another model of group life now in churches that is not open groups. And it's used in a lot of churches today where you have groups that are formed and held in a closed group fashion for a season of time, and then new groups are formed. And that's home groups, cell groups, things like that, where you have, where they're not, you can sign up in September, you know, or in January for a group, and group life is seasonal. And then those groups are formed to meet one another's needs for the time that they're formed. And so, but this is different. What you're doing here is different. You're here to offer the Word of God on a regular basis to people, to disciple them in the context of your ministry in an open fashion so that anybody can come anytime and be a part of it. And that's what an open group is. And that's a typical Sunday school approach. What you're doing here in your Sunday school is foundational to the work of the church. It's foundational to the work of the church. Open groups are foundational. They're a place for mobilizing, harnessing the energy of the church itself. My pastor that I worked with for 12 years in Fort Worth, after we had 2 services, and after the first service he would always say, now if you haven't joined a Sunday school class, you need to do it in the next hour. And he'd say, because Sunday school is where the church is the church. Because he said the way that we are organized, the church is actually meeting now. You know, as you go into your small groups, as you actually learn more about what it means to be a community in these groups, you're experiencing the church as it was meant to be. And you know, saying things like, you know, if you depend on me to bring you a casserole when you're sick, you know, you'll be waiting a long time. But your group is where life happens in the church. Now, it also is where energy happens as well. That and this is important because so much of the ministry work of this church is dependent upon your groups. If the pastor did not have a way to decentralize, he would have to do all the organizing. He would have to do all the communicating. He would have to do all the ministry. But that's not what Ephesians 4 tells us, that he was sent here to equip you for works of service. And so he does that. He equips you for works of service. And then the energy for mobilizing and harnessing the energy of the church comes through your open groups, your small groups, your Bible study, your Sunday school. And it's an entry point in the church for unbelievers and believers to come during your Sunday school time. I guess the caution to that is that you have to ask yourself as a group, are we open to both believers and unbelievers? If people bring with them visitors who aren't Christians, who are not disciples of Jesus Christ, what does it feel like in here? How welcoming are we? Are we open to anybody at any time to come to us? Or does it feel like a clique when people walk in? How are they greeted? How are they addressed during the time? Do we recognize them? Do we invite them to go to church with us afterwards when we go to worship service? Do we even invite them to lunch after we're done? Yeah. How welcoming are we to that? And it's a place, like I said before, where we mature. I won't go into that because we just talked about that in the last hour and a half. Open groups are ongoing. There's always a place for Bible study in a convenient time to be here. And always ongoing relationships with groups, and a place for ministry, outreach, fellowship, the idea of ongoing. We have an ongoing ministry through our Sunday school that if you come in July or if you come in January, we're here. We're open for business. We're ready to go. And so it provides a ministry when ministry is needed. Open groups are evangelistic. Now, I should probably say should be. Open groups should be evangelistic. In the next time after lunch, we're going to talk about how do we evangelize through the Sunday school. But it needs to be a place where there's a climate of evangelistic proclamation. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to share the plan of salvation every time you meet together to teach. And if you know your people well enough, you should know those who are in Christ and those who aren't. However, we always need the gospel. Regardless of who we are or how long we've been a part of this, we always need to be reminded of the gospel, because you are either sharing the gospel or you're equipping people to share the gospel in your groups. And so keep in mind, principally, we're about evangelism in here. Yes, we're about discipleship, but we can't do discipleship unless we do evangelism. Open groups focus on Bible study. That's a given. It should be a given. And here's though something I want to challenge you to, is not just about you doing Bible study for others, but how are you leading them to do Bible study?
Right.
How are you equipping them? And I want to even go back to like the children's ministry. You know, are we instilling in children just a teach me attitude, or are we getting them involved in the process of learning? Many churches give their children Bibles. You know, as they reach a certain age, they get their Bible. That's an important time. That's an important message to the church. If you're not doing it, you should do it, because people need to know that this is important to my life. And it's not just about me showing up on Sunday for someone else to tell me about it. It's something I have now to read, to study, to pour into my life. And so, yes, it's about teaching the Bible on Sunday morning, but it's also, Sunday school is about you helping them learn how to study the Bible themselves, and how to see this as something important in their own lives. Sometimes this can be done through the way in which we teach. The teaching that only centers on the teacher's proclamation and presentation doesn't really get people or students involved in personal learning. And so you have to be careful to go back to pedagogy again, Mike. Pedagogically, in a teaching model, are you engaging them in Bible study, or are you just giving them Bible study? Because when you engage them, when you ask them questions, when you get them involved in relating what they're seeing, helping them learn how to interpret that, and then learn how to apply it in your group, you're giving them tools to use when they go home. And not just listening to you for X amount of minutes. So keep that in mind. Open groups multiply. This is a tough word here. We don't say the word split. We don't say the word divide in Sunday school work. Those are 4-letter words, even though they're longer than 4 letters. Because it does threaten people. When they see, you're going to split my group? You're going to divide us? How dare you do that? But the point of this, folks, is multiplication. That you're doing what you're doing so that you might reproduce, that you might grow a new group, and they might grow a group, and they might grow a group. You might grow 2 or 3 groups. It's funny, as I was looking back on a group that, when I first came to my church, I wasn't on staff, I was a member of the church, but I was involved in the teaching ministry at that time. But the group that I was involved with at that time, back in 1997, has since spun off 8 new groups since that time. And I was counting them around the church, and I thought, this is really interesting, how this group has grown and spun out, different classes and different groups. And that's a challenge to us to do that. But it's not just about growing our classes. What's happening in our time together in our Sunday school classes, that we're also growing leaders. We're growing leaders. The people in your class. Now everybody in your group's not going to be a teacher. That's granted. We know that. That's, God gives us all different gifts. So, but everybody's going to be a leader somewhere. And if they're not being equipped and ready to be a leader, maybe in the structure of your class, there's somewhere else they need to be leading. If you're teaching parents, they certainly need to be leading at home, and that needs to be a part of your mission in your class. Even in our preschool and children's classes, helping our parents parent well, is developing leaders that come out of our larger class idea and structure, where parents are really a part of our class because their kids are there. But we're also growing. The organization itself. We're seeing that it grows, and we spin out classes. And guess what? After a while, we need to have 2 hours of worship and 2 hours of Sunday school, because we have grown by multiplying over time. Or maybe we're spinning out some groups that are meeting outside our walls during the week, in places, in workplaces, in our homes, other places where this is being replicated in different ways. It doesn't always have to happen, at the church house on Sunday morning. It can happen anywhere at any time. But we need to see our ministry as multiplication. Multiplication. A number of years ago, there was a man who we call kind of the father of modern day Sunday school, and his name was Arthur Flake. How many of you ever heard of Flake's formula? Okay, some people. Most of you did not. His name's not mentioned a lot, but his ideas are still mentioned a lot, and his principles are still valid. He was actually a business owner and a salesman in Winona, Mississippi, back in the late 1800s, and he had such a passion for Sunday school that he applied his principles that he learned in his business dealings to his role as the Sunday school director of his church at First Baptist Church in Winona. And as a result of his principles that he applied to it, that church grew exponentially because their Sunday school classes grew. And then the Mississippi Baptist Convention took note of his work and said, "Oh, would you come be our Sunday school director for the state?" So he gave up his business and went to work for the Mississippi Baptist Convention, which then he applied the principles to the churches in Mississippi. They grew as a result of that. So then, as always happens, he became a star, and the Sunday school board, which is now called Lifeway, recognized what he was doing and said, "You need to come to Nashville, and you need to be an evangelist of Sunday school growth all over the nation, in all of our churches." And he did. And as a result of that, the Southern Baptist Convention churches began to grow and develop and become really what they still are today. I'm not saying this pridefully, it's just a fact that the Southern Baptist Convention still leads the way in Sunday school. a lot of denominations, Sunday school is a relic for them, and a secondary issue. The SBC still is leading the way in this area of ministry, and it really started with Arthur Flake. The principles that you see here on the screen are adaptations of his principles. These are not his original principles. What I did was I took them and I reworded them to make them more relevant for today, and also to make them relevant for you as a teacher as well, so that you could take these principles and apply them to your ministry, and seek to, through these principles and the power of the Holy Spirit and God's work in your life, grow your class. Develop a healthy class of people, and also lead them to greater growth individually and personally and spiritually. So the 5 principles here: identify the possibilities, organize with purpose, mobilize for ministry, equip kingdom leaders, and don't add, multiply. So let's look at identify the possibilities first. A man by the name of Harry Pyland was he sat in Arthur Flake's position in the 1970s and 1980s and early into the 1990s at the Sunday School Board. And I got to know him as a guest professor when I went to seminary in the early 90s. And he said the possibilities include 2 groups of people: those currently enrolled and those not enrolled. That's an easy way to look at this idea. A Sunday school is responsible for reaching the saved and the lost, and it must know who these persons are. So, how do we know where the possibilities are for people who need to be in our class? You tell me. What are some avenues of identifying the possibilities of people who need to be a part of our class, of your class?
The parents of the kids who came to Vacation Bible School.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody who comes to Vacation Bible School, every kid has parents. And those parents, if they're not already here, and they're not already a part of a church somewhere else, they're possibilities, aren't they? Yeah, where else? Where else would you find possibilities?
HEB parking lot.
The HEB parking lot, yes.
Yeah.
In the community.
Inside
Yeah.
HEB.
Well, we'll say your network of relationships.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean people, you know.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily. Relationships don't always mean people you know well. Sometimes it's people you meet in the line at the store, and you start up a conversation, and suddenly you're talking about church, and you find out they're not going anywhere, and you say, well, we'd love to have you come. In fact, I teach a class, and I'd love for you to be there. So your network of just stuff that you do and places you go during the week. What are some other possibilities?
In the workplace.
In the workplace, people you work with. Betty?
One thing that the church was next door to an elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And with our quilting group, we gave every preschooler a quilt to sleep on.
Okay.
And we reached many parents.
Oh wow, getting the parents through the ministry, going through the ministries, and finding out who they're seeing, and if they're in ministry doing these things, making sure that information is passed along to people who they could reach out to. Those are all good possibilities, and here's just a list of things that I've come up with. That some of them are things you mentioned. You might have a community survey where you're just asking people questions about, where are you in church right now? If you were, would you be interested in coming to a church that's close by you? What would you be looking for if you were? Just innocuous questions that kind of get their interest. You can have a community survey. You can do a demographic or newcomer information that communities routinely supply to sales marketers and others that have people's names and addresses, and they can be sent information. But your membership role at your church is a pretty healthy place, right? You know, anyone who is a part of your church but is not in a Sunday school class needs to be. And so those people need to be identified. Those are possibilities. Inactive group members, you know, people who were a part and are no longer a part. And maybe they never joined the church, but their name is there. Where are they? And why aren't they here? Worship service visitors, that's a pretty easy one. Special events, we talked about VBS. One of the richest, the reason I put the last one in red is because this is one of the richest ones. Gets the most traction, is friends, family, neighbors, and coworkers. You know, people you know in your life. And intentionally having ways to invite people, to identify people who can be part. So if you want your church to grow or your class to grow, you got to know what the possibilities are out there. And that's pretty simple, isn't it? You know, a businessman would say, if I want to sell somebody something, I got to know who it is I need to sell it to. And so Flake said, figure out who the possibilities are. Where does it start? It starts with identifying the people. Organize with purpose. Arthur Flake himself said it will be necessary to enlarge the organization in order to take care of all the people. And there will be no use to go on with the same organization hoping to increase the size of the Sunday school permanently. Now there's a myth, I guess it would be, that we grow by expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding. And that's a myth. That's not true. We can't grow in what we do here in the church by just keeping going, expanding, 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 expanding. Okay, we have to reproduce, not expand.
So when you talk about expanding, you mean physical or membership count?
Well, okay. Well, let me run you through this. Maybe that'll help to answer your question there. We have to make sure when we start that we have an organization that has a place for everybody. Okay, because it would be counterproductive to say, well, we've got one Sunday school class and we've got one worship service, so everyone leave this room and go to another room, and we're just going to keep growing and growing and growing that way. It's not going to happen. We have to move people into groups where they can start experiencing life with one another, and grow in small groups rather than just simply seeing our worship service as one big thing. We need to keep growing and growing and growing. And so we need to think about how we're going to grow this. You need to be a part of these decisions. You need to look at what's around you and say, how are we organized? Are we ready to grow here? Do we have groups that represent different kinds of people in different walks of life, at different ages and different stages and statuses of life? Are we content with just the organization we have right now? Or do we see the possibilities for a bigger organization that has other classes and other groups? Where are the gaps right now in your organization that people are underrepresented in? You know, you may have, well, we don't have a group that represents this stage of life or this status or this situation where people would naturally go into. Well, okay, then we need to start that group. We need to organize to. This is just illustrative. This is not a recommendation for you. We need to provide more classes so that if we have one children's class, maybe we need to divide them up into 2 classes now, so that we can grow those 2 classes instead of just trying to expand that one group that represents all children. If we have one adult class right now, maybe we need 2, because we can't just keep expanding this one class, because the reproduction of our ministry happens as we reproduce classes rather than just keep doing the same thing with the same people. And over time, what happens is the organization gets bigger and more complex, surely, but we're representing more people, and we're growing with purpose in mind. We're organizing with purpose in mind. And that purpose is to reach as many people as we can in different ways. Now this looks daunting, I'm sure, to you right now, but it's representing an idea that right now, with your current structure, there's only so far you can go. And you've got to keep in your mind as a teacher, so how can I prepare my group to grow? And what can we do to prepare leaders so that we can have more groups and more opportunities to reach people in Bible study? So organize with purpose. Mobilize for ministry. A.V. Washburn was another generation leader at the Sunday school board, and he said the only absolute requirements for a good learning situation are a pupil and a good teacher. However, even the best teacher can do a better job with adequate resources. When you look around your space and you see what's there, what do you see? You have to see what you do and how you do it on Sunday morning through the lens of someone who's never been there before. And you need to mobilize your group to prepare to grow in ways that they haven't really thought about before. As you think about these ideas, think about your space right now. What does your space look like when people walk in the room? What does it look like? How are the chairs arranged? How welcoming is it to folks when they come in? Even things, does it look, disorganized? Posters on the wall from 1975. Does it look old and decrepit, or does it look fresh and inviting and warm? Okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have gold-plated molding. It just means that it just needs to be a welcoming environment. You need to have an attractive learning space. You have to mobilize your area to grow in ministry by the chairs that you have, the equipment that you're using, the furnishings that are there, the supplies that you're using, the types of Bible study material that you're using. Mobilizing for ministry means that you're trying to do the best you can do with what you have. And so keep this principle in mind as you're thinking about how to grow your group. I was confronted with this a couple of times in my last ministry, where I didn't think about the fact that that all the handouts that I was sending to my classes on Sunday morning were on this bright yellow neon paper, and I I got word back from my older groups that they couldn't read it because it hurt their eyes and they couldn't focus on that bright yellow neon paper. So that's kind of a minuscule, weird thing to focus on, but then as I thought about it, I said, well, anything that hinders people from learning is a bad thing. And so I've got to make sure that everything I'm doing in my group is encouraging them to learn. From the paper I'm using to the air conditioning, to the condition of the room and the seats and the tables, and are the things that are around us conducive to growth and learning. And you know that, and you can ask yourself that question, but step back and really be honest and say, if I were coming in here for the first time, how would I see this place and this experience? And if there are some things that need to be changed, what would I do and how would I do it? Equip kingdom leaders. You need to be a kingdom leader. You need to be a kingdom leader. You need to understand that your domain that you are part of as a Sunday school teacher belongs to the Lord. And it does not belong to you. It is not your possession. At the same time, your efforts here are not just for New Hope Baptist Church, and not just for the association of Baptist churches in this area, and not just for the region or the state. You are here for the world, for God's world. J. N. Barnett said, Jesus saw the multitudes. He commanded his disciples to pray for laborers. A pastor should pray and lead the church to pray for workers without ceasing in the worship service, in the prayer meeting, in the weekly meetings, and in secret places. The message behind what Barnett had to say here is that as Sunday school teachers, we need to be looking for leaders. And we need to be training them, and we need to be in training constantly ourselves. We need to be, I'm absolutely overjoyed to see this group around this table today. And I know the pastor is overjoyed that you're here, among those who are here, and he knows that there are more who couldn't be here because of physical things and other things, and so he's going to make sure that they get this, and that they're able to see this and are a part of this, because he knows this is kingdom work. And so he's willing to put in the time and the effort and the resources to train and prepare leaders. Well, that's not just his job. That's your job too, in your group, that you are about training leaders. And that could be adults who are in a class that need to be leaders in another area. It could be the leaders who are part of the children's ministry that need to be regularly trained and equipped and prepared on a regular basis. And so your responsibility, if you're over them, is to see that that happens. It's your responsibility to see that you are prepared as well. Here are just some ways that I think we can be equipped, and we can equip people for this kingdom service that we've been called to, so that we can grow. Because we can't grow without more leaders. And so in equipping kingdom leaders, I think first thing we do, just like Barnett said earlier, is pray. He started at the right place. When Jesus was seeing all that had to be done out in front of him, he said, pray for workers in the harvest. This world that I have identified here, these people, are a harvest field to be won for me. Yeah, because back in Mark 1, he identified himself as the kingdom of God. He said, the kingdom of God is near. I'm here. The kingdom is here. I've arrived. Now, we need leaders to build the kingdom. And so pray first. Pray for your class on a regular basis. And ask God to reveal to you who are some leaders around me that I can be encouraging, and I can be identifying, and I can be helping to prepare for the next opportunity that God has for them. In some cases, this could be to replace me, because I'm not going to be here forever, and this church needs leaders for the next generation. Who are those people going to be? Pray for them. Pray that God would continue to change your heart about the kingdom and your place in it. Preparing for it. That means training. Okay, it means training. You're doing that. Always be ready to train and be prepared. I had a Sunday school teacher in my oldest ladies class in my first church that I served at, and her name was Inez. And Inez was 95 years old when I got to the church, and Inez was still the teacher when she said, I'm teaching the old ladies, is what she said. But she was not just there on Sunday morning delivering a message. She was out on the road all week long, driving her car from place to place, from person to person. She was intimately involved in the lives of every one of those ladies. She knew what was going on in their lives. She was ministering to them, and she was always attending and front row at every training event I had. And then one night I scheduled a training event in the first week of January in the mountains of North Carolina, and that was stupid. You don't do that, and I didn't realize that. That in first week of January in the mountains of North Carolina, you're always going to have snow. It's just invariably it happens, and it happened that night. And but I went to the church house because if anybody showed up, I didn't want them to be there alone. And but I figured nobody would show up because of the forecast. So I got there, I walked into the room, guess who was in the front of the room? Inez was there, yeah. Inez was in her place. And I said, Miss Inez, what are you doing here? Said you could, you know, it's dangerous out on the road right now, and you could be hurt going home. And she said, oh, I'll be fine. And I said, well, besides that, she said, what can I have to teach you? What can you learn from me that you don't already know? And she said, oh dear, she said, I can always learn something. She said, when I was saved to serve. Yeah. And I'm going to serve until the Lord calls me home. That's right. I said, okay. And she did. You know, she served right up till the time that the Lord took her. And that's always an inspiration for me whenever I'm tempted to say, well, I don't need to learn that. I don't need to train for this. It's like Inez said, I can always learn something.
That's right.
And we always go back to, you know, God called us to serve. And part of serving is preparing. Let's always be prepared. And be a part of preparing others as well. Shepherding. A kingdom leader is one who shepherds the people. And so as a kingdom leader, you need to be about shepherding. I know it's tempted just to think of in terms of your cognitive dump on Sunday morning, but that's just part of your role. You have a flock, a mini flock that you've been given to help, to shepherd, to prepare, to look after, to care for. And being a kingdom leader means that you're shepherding your people. That's what's going to grow this church and these people, is when they see uncommon people loving them uncommonly. And that's going to change things. Evangelizing. Kingdom growth happens through evangelizing. And we'll get to that next time, so I'm not going to dwell on that. Mentoring. Kingdom growth happens when your leaders are investing in the lives of other leaders personally. Not just encouraging, not just, you know, trying to identify, but when you're actually spending time with others, pouring into them and helping them to grow personally as leaders. That's how a kingdom leader is developed. And then multiplying. Back to the same word again. When you see your role as a multiplier, and I'm going to talk about multiplication in just a second. That's the last principle. Don't add, multiply. Why multiply? Okay? Why not say, well, let's add people to this class instead of multiply? How would you answer that? Why am I using the word multiply rather than just say add?
Because add is slower.
Okay, there you go, Denise. Yeah.
Multiply.
Adding is a slower process, isn't it?
It takes a lot longer, yeah.
It takes a lot longer to grow when you add people. Because adding happens one at a time, doesn't it? Multiplication, though, is a different process. And multiplication means that we're actually taking our efforts and investing them in others who then are investing in others, who are investing in others, who are investing in others. That goes out in that trajectory rather than just, well, I've got one person to invite. You know, we want to grow this class. We want to double the number in this class in the next year or the next 2 years. We want to triple the number of folks that we have in our Sunday school, you know, by 2025. But whatever the goal is that you have for yourself, always think in terms of multiplying rather than just adding people. Yeah. And always go back to this principle that it's not about me trying to continually to adding and multiplying to my class, but multiplying places and opportunities and experiences that people can have. Because your class can only grow so big, and it starts breaking down, and those relationships become shallower, and you become a less effective shepherd when you're looking after 20 people as opposed to 10 people. It's natural. it's human dynamics that when you get bigger, more people don't think they're important enough to show up every week because who's going to miss me? And so continue to dwell on these principles of multiplying opportunities, multiplying units, multiplying classes, so that you can reach as many people as you can. Yes?
Don't some churches have some numbers that when a class reaches a certain point, they go ahead and start another class?
Some do, yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't remember what the numbers
Okay,
are,
well,
but-
see, here's where you come into play, you leaders, is that when your pastor comes to you and say, we need a strategy for multiplying in this church, you're going to be willing to say, okay, we're all in, and the assumption for all of this is that we are going to grow to a certain point, and then we're going to prepare to have a new group start. Okay, and that happens at the inception of a plan, rather than along the way. When you wait and do it along the way, then you start getting resistance. When people haven't been prepared for it, when they're not ready for it, when they get comfortable in the way they do things and don't have a mindset of multiplication, kingdom work, then it's them. It's their group. How dare you have me send my people somewhere else? Well, it's not about you, but those are principles and ideas that need to be generated at the beginning of a plan and agreed upon, and then followed up on as you move forward in the plan, instead of just hoping those things will work themselves out along the way.
So, Dr. Shirley?
Yeah.
I heard one time about between 6 and 12 is a good size for a small group. I don't know if...
I would say with current practices, I would say anywhere between 12 and 15.
12 and 15?
And the reason I say that, and I'm talking more about adult groups in this case, the reason I say that is because in current practices, people don't attend regularly anywhere. And so it takes more effort to get people there. If you say 6, then you might end up with 2 on a particular day, And you don't want to go too small, you don't want to go too big. But if you say, we're going to grow to about 15, then you regularly will fluctuate about 10 to 12 people that are there. And so that if you're thinking small group, that model,
Actually, I feel like 15 is getting on the large side.
Yeah.
You lose some of the character of intimacy of a small group, but like you said, if you have 15, there probably won't be more than 12 there.
Yeah. You'll have between 10 and 12 there on a regular basis. And just that life makes it that way. It's not necessarily people who don't want to be there. It's just life. Particularly in groups that, like my group, most of us there are empty nesters, and we've always got stuff to do, places to go, people to be with, and so you have this intermittent. You have a core group, and then you've got your B group that's there a couple times a month, and you've got your C group that's there once a month, and then your D group that's there, every now and then. You kind of recognize those folks, don't you? So David Francis talks about this multiplication here. He says, some growth experts suggest it takes an average of 20 contacts to get a person in a Bible study group for the first time. Don't give up too soon. Lives and souls are at stake. That's kind of challenging to us to say that we need to all be on the same team. Whether you are teaching a preschooler, whether you're teaching an older adult, it doesn't really matter, because you're all speaking the same message to the people that you're encountering. To the parents who show up to pick up their kids, and asking them, so what group are you a part of? Well, we don't come, we just drop our kids off. Oh, well, we've got a perfect group here for you. I know someone who can be in touch with you. And in our groups, we've got parents who have kids, grandkids, you know, who aren't in church. Oh, these grandkids need to be in church. We're gonna make sure they get to our preschool ministry, to our children's ministry. You know, we're all looking out after each other, speaking the same message with the same thing in mind. That's kingdom growth. So, any questions or feedback on this session before we break for lunch?
I just wanna add to what
Yes,
you
ma'am.
said, there's a kid here named Seth. He's somebody's grandchild. And he doesn't come to Sunday school, I don't think.
Okay.
Anyways, somebody's child, somebody's grandchild, Seth.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
I introduced him to Angela the other day, just in the services, we had
Mhm.
the music group for
Yeah.
meals.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew who he was. I think he's 10 or 9 or
I'm not sure.
12, no, 12, maybe 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's the right mindset to have. When you identify people, find out where they're at and where they belong, and help to facilitate the relationship that helps move them towards one of the groups that you do have. That's being a kingdom leader. Okay, Pastor, tell us what's next.
So, Kim is on her way with lunch